Thank you for attending or watching our Tips for Improving Your Grant Application, part of the Arts and Humanities Grants Program for FY23. Um, this is for returning organizations and new organizations applying for grants. We will not be going through the entire grant application. So if you're a first time grant applicant and you would like a tutorial on the grants program from start to finish, please reach out and schedule a one-on-one tutorial with Corey Price at cprice at fallschurchva.gov. So today is more about things that have been seen by grants review committee members over the years, things that they missed or was lacking in a applicant's form that's commonly seen, and that you should be aware of these things that the grants review committee members are looking for in your applications, so that you can improve your application and make it stronger for this year. So the first tip is make sure you review all documentation. Um, there is for both the operations grant and the project grant 4 documents: a grant application procedure document, a grant guidelines document, the grant application, and the grant reimbursement form. I know that our grantees and applicants are very busy and have limited time, but to skip right to the grant application, you're missing important information that's going to be helpful to make sure that you're successful in your application. Reviewing what the guidelines are, even if you've been an applicant before, is important because we do take feedback in from past grant recipients and our grants review committee to improve the process for everyone. So you want to know about any changes that have happened from the previous year. It's also important to review the grants reimbursement form. That's the form that you submit if you receive a grant as part of your finished application. Once you've completed your project or spent your operational funding, it is the document that you submit with your receipts for reimbursement. So it's important to know what information is requested on that reimbursement form from the beginning so that you are able to take that information, things like what we take as a receipt, that you hold on to them, file them away, so you have all the materials you need when it's time for reimbursement. All of these documents can be on the city's website under our grants program. Here is a screenshot of what that page looks like. The top section has information about what organizations qualify, what projects qualify. You can see the grant cycle here, and then the document links are all below. Now, these are for the FY22 project and operational grant because I made these slides months ago. So it's now all up to date to FY23. The second thing is please don't copy and paste from last year. There's always room for improvement. And we have some grant review committee members that were reviewing grants last year that will be reviewing grants this year as well. And so they want to see the things that they saw as weaknesses be improved from year to year. And if you were a grant recipient last year and you'd like to know any feedback that the grant review committee shared on your grant applications, happy to share that information with you. And but it is totally fine to apply for the same project. So, for example, if you applied for a festival last year and you want to reapply because the festival is annual, that's fine. Same with operations grant. If you applied for something like rent last year and you want to submit operations request for rent this year, that's also fine. The third tip is that the grants review committee members are scoring the applications based on the information provided. A lot of the applications that come through are very minimal. They're answering the question, but they're not giving a lot of detail. The more detailed that you are, the more the grants review committee members know about your project. It shows that you're committed. I know that our grants review committee members are members of the community. They may know the organizations, and but you don't want to assume that they know that information. They are supposed to be looking at what's presented in front of them. So it's really important to list all that information. And we'll go a little bit more into detail under tip number 4. So tip number 4 is going to take a lot of our time this evening, talking about specific examples on how your application meets the goals and criteria. We have 5 different criteria or goals that the grants review committee member is scoring each application off of. They're the same 5 criteria for both the project grant and the operations grant. On appropriateness, how it meets the goals of the grants program, the merit, if there is a well-defined project need or a well-defined operational need that you've explained how you're going to finish the project, the details of the project, and that you have a plan, not just an idea. The financial need, showing that the amount, you're not just picking an arbitrary amount of money, that this amount is necessary, and the costs have, you have something to back up the cost that you're listing. The next one is organizational capacity. We understand that these organizations are small. Some of them are all nonprofit led, but we want to make sure that there is leadership and there is the manpower to complete the projects within our grant cycle and operational as well. But our grant cycle falls within the city's fiscal year. So it is important to think about creating a project that meets that amount of time. The final one is service to the community. How is this project going to serve local residents, and specifically in the areas of art, history, theater, and cultural education? So we're going to go through those 5 things first in the project grants and then in the operational grants. So first, appropriateness. And appropriateness, there's a lot to go into this section. It's actually scored out of 10. It has more value than the others because we really want to make sure that the project or the operational expenses are appropriate for this grants program. So an example of a project might be a street festival that offers a main stage of talent, amusement, and food trucks. I can kind of visualize what that festival is, but there's not a whole lot of detail there. And unless you give more detail, the grant review committee member is going to try to figure out how this is appropriate for our project. So is it a 1-day or 1-night event? How is that stimulating excellence? Can you explain that in more detail, connecting the stimulating excellence with this one-time event? What type of talent are you having on that main stage? Are they local artists? What's the quality of the artists on the stage? Um, you listed amusement and food trucks. That sounds like a great street festival, but what does that have to do with stimulating arts, theater, culture, and history? You really need to focus on the things that relate to arts and culture, and that's why you might want to provide more information about that main stage talent. Also, under appropriateness is encouraging cultural and ethnic diversity in Falls Church. So another event might be a free performance of high quality musicians. Again, lacking some really important details here when it comes to cultural and ethnic diversity. So maybe you could share something to help the grants review committee answer their questions of, is there any diversity effort made in the selection of musicians or music? What is this music? Who are the musicians? What type of marketing or outreach is being done to draw in cultural or diverse audiences? Obviously, it's important that local residents are participating, but like, who are those local residents? And are you trying to expand your reach of who's coming to these programs? Another point out is that diversity, when you're targeting audiences, are you thinking about diversity when you're marketing or thinking about who your audience is going to be? The next point of appropriateness is enhancing the quality of life in Falls Church through stimulating economic development, supporting educational advances in arts, theater, culture, and history, appealing to the widest audience, making arts, culture, theater, and history accessible to all. That's a lot. Some projects will take one or two of these. Some will reach all of them, but you want to explain as many as possible that your project touches. So one example of a project might be purchase a new historic marker for a historically significant structure. So the Grants Review Committee, looking at that limited information, might want to know, how does this historic marker stimulate the economy? Well, if it's a Civil War Trails marker, the Civil War Trails program is known to bring historic tourism and lots of economic benefit to communities, and they have data and statistics that can back that up. So you'd want to present that information in your application. What other maybe educational benefits come with this sign? Do you plan to engage the schools, or you're hoping that the community will be more knowledgeable on a particular topic? Do you know if the community really wants this sign? What is it appealing to the widest audience, or is it a very like niche topic? Um, and then finally, is the sign placed in a location accessible to those that need handicap accessibility? I know that most of our signs, are close to sidewalks and are accessible to those that need handicap accessibility, but not all of them are. So when thinking about this application, you want to think about, say, where your marker is going to go and answer these questions. When it comes to merit, making sure again that these funds are being used for a well-defined project with a well-developed plan of action. Another example, painting a mural in a city park with a skateboard ramp. So the Grants Review Committee wants to make sure that your project is well defined, it has a detailed plan. So things that they might be looking for in your application under this criteria might be, have you received permission from the Recreation and Parks Department to paint on the city park? or sign-offs from other departments that might be necessary for using city facilities or painting a mural. Um, are there any permits required? Obviously, a skateboarding ramp is pretty far to the ground. You probably aren't near a driveway, but if you do have to close a right of way or block off parking or something like that, what permits that you might need. Um, they're looking to know how far along in this idea of painting a mural are you? So, who is the artist that you have selected to paint this mural? Can you submit samples of past work with your application? Is the mural design finalized, or are you just at the step with the artist and you have a timeline on when that mural will be finalized? And again, that timeline is so important, showing when each step of the process is going to be done. It gives confidence to the grants review committee members that there's a well thought of plan, and it's a project that will be successful. Another thing to consider if you're doing anything like art is there a maintenance plan? Is there funding in the organization for maintenance? Or is the project planning to be there for a certain number of years and then paint it over so that they don't have to worry about deteriorating art? So all things that the grants review committee members is looking at when thinking about the merit of a project. The next is financial need. Um, they really want to make sure that the amount requested is necessary and efficient. So I didn't put an example of a particular project in here because it's the same issue no matter what your project is. Um, you really, really need to include a budget with your application that includes both revenue and expenses, and it should be a balanced budget. It should be a budget that includes all the necessary costs and all the revenue for that project, not just the expenses that you're planning to pay for with the grant application. It should also be what we all think of as a budget. Um, do not write just a paragraph with this is going to cost this much and we're going to buy this and it's going to cost that much. Have a real formal budget. That's what the grant review committee members want to see. Also, what are these numbers based off of? If you are purchasing items and you have a quote for them, share the quote. Have that documentation in there. It shows that you're really prepared and ready to do this project. There's certainly been projects over the years where grant review committee members have responded, I can't judge this because I don't have enough information. And that's the last thing we want is a project not getting funded or getting the funding they need because the information wasn't provided in their grant application. The next section is organizational capacity. The grant review committee members want to make sure that there's the leadership and manpower to complete this project, and that the organization has thought out this process because we know so many of these organizations are very small and there's only so much time to give, and they want to make sure that you've thought out that you have the ability to do so. So an example, the completion of this project is expected to take 100 hours of volunteer time. So the grant review committee members, they see that that's a lot of hours. It seems like a really strong commitment, but there's not a real clear understanding of do you already have the volunteers or do you need to recruit the volunteers? Who's the leader that's going to organize these volunteers? Are these volunteers skilled volunteers on a particular task, or can anyone do this? So like, for example, if it's a festival, maybe you need people to help set up and break down, and you can give direction the day of. Now you'd still need someone to be the leader of those volunteers, but they don't need a lot of skill, whereas someone that is doing work that's a, graphic designer. Not anyone. I certainly can't sign up to be a graphic designer volunteer. Those are more skilled hours. So any information that you can provide around who's going to do this work is helpful to the grants review committee. The last section, service to the community. The project is supposed to serve local residents. And so they want to see how local residents will benefit from these project grants. So an example, a new art class is to expand the variety of programming offered through the organization. So sounds like a wonderful project. Would love to know more about how it serves the local residents. So um, is there any criteria to make sure that local residents will receive seats at the table? Um, are most of your participants usually local residents or not? The Grants and Review Committee might not be familiar with that. Um, you know, there might be local residents that can't afford the class if there's a high fee. Is there any scholarships to allow for local residents that might not be able to afford an expensive class? How is local residents going to know about the project? Are you marketing it out to the community? How are you doing outreach so that the community knows that there's these new classes happening? So those were some all examples of project grant things that grant review committee members are thinking about, looking for. Now we're going to switch to the operations grants. So we're going back again. Remember, both the project grant and the operations grant are scored on the same 5 criteria. So going back to appropriateness, is it meeting those goals of stimulating excellence, encouraging diversity, enhancing the quality of life, stimulating economic development, supporting educational advancement, widest audience, and accessibility? Again, your organization might meet some of these things, not all of them, but you want to highlight anything that your organization can prove that your core mission meets these goals of the grants program. It's going to give the grants review committee more confidence that your organization is well suited for a grant. So they're looking for things like, do your programs provide an appeal to a wide audience? Also, how are you encouraging diversity? If you can really showcase that by giving examples to the grants review committee, that's really helpful to them to see on paper. Do you have any metrics to show on how your organization might stimulate the economy? Do you do any collaboration with businesses or restaurants? Do your events bring people in from outside the community to spend money in Falls Church? All of this data is really information that should be shared in your grant application. Does your organization have a limited appeal and accessibility, or does it reach a wide audience with different interests? And is it accessible to people in the community? So all of these things, anything that your organization can answer, you really want to hit as many points as possible. In terms of merit, requested funds will be used to address an important, well-defined organizational need. Very often, operational expenses are submitted very vaguely, and I understand why that is. It definitely provides organizations to be more flexible Maybe they want to, they're not 100% sure how the breakdown of their operating expenses are going to be for the year, but they know that they're going to have a certain amount of operating expenses. But grants review committee members really want to know what you're going to spend that money on. I think some organizations that have like facility costs are concerned about listing that as the thing that they want to spend money on. But it's a wonderful, uh, great thing to put operational expenses on. Your operational expenses are annual. They happen every year, and so if you say you have facility costs and you submit them every year, like rent, something like that, it's a major cost, and grant review committee members know that, if you rent a space, that needs to be paid. Um, Sometimes we get a little confused about what an operating cost is. I know a lot of grant programs, either you can apply for a project grant or an operations grant. You can apply for both a project grant and an operations grant in our program. So you want to be clear on what is a project grant and what is an operational grant. And I think we'll get to that again in a little bit. But if you have any questions and aren't clear on what is considered an operational grant, please reach out, and we can help you answer that question so that you submit for the right things. Financial need. Again, requesting a necessary amount that makes sense. Again, that being too vague about your costs, that your grants review committee members don't want to be hazy on what you plan to spend the money on. So it's really important to send clear financial documents that they can read and they don't have to guess anything. Everything's just very well put out in your financial documents. There's so there again has been times where grant review committee has said, I can't judge this because they didn't provide enough information. And that's the last thing that you want, is that your application isn't being judged well because you didn't provide enough information for the grants review committee to make an informed decision. I think that some organizations too, it can be hard if your financials at the end of the year um, are down, that you end the year with a deficit, that it makes your organization look weak. But that's not necessarily the case. The grant review committee members often see that this organization definitely has a financial need if they are currently in a deficit. We can see where the expenses went. We understand that the revenue didn't come in for a certain reason, maybe a pandemic. So, this gives them an opportunity to help with those costs, in a time when an organization is struggling a bit. Another, again, organizational capacity, showing, not just for project grants, but showing for operational grants that your organization has the leadership and the manpower to be successful. If you have an organizational chart, submit it, add it as an attachment. That would be really helpful for the grants review committee members to see. Um, Sometimes if you don't explain, who your leadership is and how your organizations run, the grants review committee can get a little confused on whether the individuals that on a day-to-day basis are working at the organization are volunteered or paid. um, and when you're looking at an operational grant, you don't want that lack of clarity. um, you also, having that clear understanding of these are volunteer roles, these are board members, but we have certain specific services that are not dependent on volunteers, showing that, you have the support of, say, someone that does your finances, that is paid, um, or your taxes or something like that. Um, And last, again, service to the community. It's important for the grant review members to see how your organization is serving local residents, and specifically in the areas of arts, history, theater, and cultural education. So are you providing direct service? Um, is there any data that you can share on who you're serving? Do you know how many people that your organization serve are local versus not local? Do you do any outreach to the community, ways that you directly, and if say you um, do programming, and people can sign up for programs, do you also do outreach where you go out to the community, or interact with other organizations? Anything like that, it should be added to your application to make it stronger. Tip number 5 is to make sure that you understand what qualifies as an operational expense. So I did say this earlier, but I'm going to say it again because people do submit for expenses for their operational grant that aren't considered operational expenses, or they just don't qualify under our program. So things that don't qualify for operational expenses are fundraising efforts, endowment funds, political activities, salaries of part-time or full-time employees, pre-incurred costs directly associated with a particular project or program. That's, again, knowing the difference between a project or program expense and an operational expense, and then construction or renovation projects. So that's, again, if you if you were renting or owning a facility and you had renovation work. Tip number 6, again, I think tip number 1 was to read all of the documents. And one of the reasons that you read all the documents, again, is to check for new or updated requirements. We update requirements based on guidance and feedback that we get from both grant recipients and also the grant review committee members, what information they're not receiving, um, or things that become sticking points in the grants process. So we're trying to make it smoother for everyone. So we have 2 large changes. Well, I would say semi-large changes, because you should know about them, but they're not really going to impact most people. But we have one around public art projects. So we don't always get applications, project or program applications for public art. But there is now a desire to have the Arts Humanities Council review public art. And so with that being said, we need all public art projects to be reviewed by the Arts and Humanities Council before they apply for our Arts and Humanities project grant. And that's because we want to make sure that the grants review committee members aren't awarding funding to a project that the Arts and Humanities Council hasn't been signed off on yet. And the other is making sure that projects that are located on city property do receive a written approval from the city to use that property. So again, we don't want someone receiving funding from the Grants Review Committee for a giant slide in the city park, and the city didn't approve to have a giant slide in their park. Okay, that's a pretty silly example, but hopefully you understand the logic behind this new requirement. Tip 7, please ask for help. This has always been a standing offer, but organizations who submit their applications before the deadline can request a review of their application for feedback before their final submission. So we're happy to look it over, and sometimes you need an outside perspective to see where the holes are in your application. Um, it's hard to sometimes, when you know all of the information, to write it out in detail, to explain to someone that doesn't know all the information. You really want to be as detailed as possible, and so we're happy to kind of see where additional information is needed. Um, and I think this is the final tip, tip 8. Please add these important dates to your calendar. The grant application process opened on May 3rd. So that one is kind of already on the past calendar. I wanted to do this presentation after the process opened because you have lots of time to get your application in still. The grant application closes on July 12th. In October, the grant awardees will be notified. And the deadline for reimbursement this year is May 16th. And that is everything that I have to share in terms of tips for improving your application. Thank you for attending the session this evening, or watching this recording at a later date. This is the first time that we've done this. Hopefully you found it useful. If you're watching it live, I recommend writing out your application and then watching this again and seeing if you find any of those places in your application that can be even more approved. But we look forward to another great year of grant recipients in FY23. Thank you.